Peter had always preferred a low-profile existence, cherishing his quiet and orderly life. However, at the age of 40, a startling discovery one morning upended everything he knew: unusual bubbles forming on his fingertips. This peculiar condition quickly escalated from a personal curiosity to a public spectacle, leading to a swift and stark transformation in his life. Medical professionals turned him away. His circle of friends dissipated, and within a day, Peter transitioned from being an unremarkable individual to becoming the subject of intense medical scrutiny, subjected to a barrage of tests. His situation further deteriorated when law enforcement showed up at his doorstep, adding an unexpected layer of complexity to his ordeal. Peter's life prior to this incident was uneventful by most standards. Single and unsuccessful in his romantic pursuits, he found solace in his work and leisure activities, such as hiking and frequent visits to his favorite coffee shop. Despite occasional feelings of loneliness, he was content with his routine and simple pleasures. However, this tranquility was shattered when he awoke to a tingling sensation in his fingers. Initially dismissing it as a minor anomaly, Peter proceeded with his day, only to realize the severity of his condition over breakfast, marking the beginning of a profound change in his life's trajectory. The tips of his fingers were swollen and discolored. At first glance, they looked bruised, as if he had been involved in a horrible fight, but of course, this wasn't true. Peter had spent last night on a date and had done nothing out of the ordinary. He looked closer at his fingertips and noticed that the discoloration was hiding inflammation. But when he pressed the tender skin, it felt hard. It was as if bubbles had formed under his skin overnight. Trying not to panic, Peter tried his best to understand the situation. While visually, his fingertips looked alarming, he didn't feel any pain. This, of course, was reassuring to him, and Peter went about his day hoping that this strange reaction would go away on his own. But with each passing hour, his finger bubbles started getting worse. Finally, Peter noticed that his fingertips were utterly numb. Rather than getting better, it was getting worse, and he was starting to panic. The next few hours were lost in a haze of worry and confusion. Peter kept replaying yesterday, trying to figure out if he had eaten or touched anything that might have caused the skin irritation. The only thing out of the ordinary had been Peter going on a date with a woman he had met online. The two of them had been talking for a few months, and it was the first time they had met in person. While the conversation had been pleasant, Peter didn't feel any sparks and knew there was no future. And after hugging goodnight, the two of them went their separate ways. This was nothing new to Peter, who had gone on many similar dates. Another thing Peter had done yesterday was go on a hike, but this wasn't new. He went on the same trail as before, and as he was familiar with the area, Peter knew not to touch any wild plant life. Peter was trying to remember every tree and branch he had touched yesterday and wondered if maybe he had come in contact with something poisonous. And with the bubbles only getting worse, he decided to seek medical help. The 40-year-old called ahead and informed the staff about his condition and even asked if they thought it was anything to worry about. But of course, the person told Peter that he couldn't give any opinion over the phone and would have to come in. He had assumed that just mentioning the bubbles would have raised some alarm, but on call, the hospital staff seemed relatively calm. Peter had no idea at the time, but this was the start of the end for him. His appointment was booked for the next day, and the staff reassured Peter that it was not a medical emergency. But despite that, the 40-year-old wasn't able to rest. Instead, he stressed and worried about his fingers. The bubbles hadn't gotten worse, but they weren't improving either. And now, Peter started noticing a strange warm sensation that began spreading towards his palm and got worse every time he closed and opened his fist. He tried calling the hospital again, but no one bothered even to pick up his calls this time. Peter worried that these bubbles might be a sign of something severe, but with nothing else to do but wait, he tried to calm himself down. But this was easier said than done. The night before his appointment, he kept tossing and turning, desperate for sleep, but his mind kept racing. His fingertips felt hot, and the bubbles looked more inflamed than before. After a horrible night, Peter was frantic about getting to the hospital. He decided not to wait till his appointment, which was later in the day, and headed straight to the emergency room. While it felt like the right decision at the time, the crowded hospital was in complete disarray, and Peter had to wait 3 hours to have a nurse see him. The 40-year-old was in pain and annoyed, but he tried his best to stay calm. Peter explained to the nurse how he had an appointment later but felt like he was experiencing a medical emergency. so he decided to come earlier. Rather than being sympathetic to him, the nurse visibly rolled her eyes and asked Peter to show him the problem. But her entire demeanor changed when she saw Peter's fingertips. The bubbles, which had started small, were now the size of small coins and were bright red. Peter knew just by looking at the nurse's reaction that whatever he had was urgent. The nurse quickly asked Peter to recount when the bubbles had appeared and wrote down all of his symptoms. She also asked him if she had been in contact with anyone sick or exposed to any virus. Peter confirmed that nothing out of the ordinary had happened to him following the days before the bubbles appeared, to which the nurse raised her eyebrows. It was clear that she didn't believe him. Ready for another lofty wait to see the doctor, Peter got comfortable on the examining table. Still, within minutes of the nurse leaving, a well-groomed and professional-looking doctor arrived, holding his file. The doctor didn't even waste time with pleasantries and immediately started asking Peter questions about his fingertips. He also thoroughly examined the bubbles and told the 40-year-old the news he feared the most. Peter's doctor had no idea what was causing the bubbles. In fact, he had not seen anything like this, but the inflammation was progressing at a rate that alarmed him, and the doctor requested that Peter undergo many tests. While on the surface, it looks like a terrible skin reaction. Without proper proof, the doctor could not recommend treatment. So, without any option, Peter spent the better part of the day going through several tests. But this was just the start of the long journey. It was going to take 2 weeks for the results to come in, and in the meanwhile, Peter was asked to stay at the hospital. The doctors had no idea how contagious this illness was and needed to keep the 40-year-old in quarantine until sure. So in the span of a day, Peter's entire life shifted. Where he once followed a simple routine, now he was forced to live inside a sterilized room where he was asked to keep his distance from doctors and nurses at all times. With no one to talk to and no entertainment, Peter used this time to reflect on his week before his fingertips started swelling. The 40-year-old had initially told the doctors that he hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, and while it was true, Peter went over everything he had done the night before the bubbles appeared to figure out if he had missed anything. He went over every detail of the day. Peter had spent the morning getting ready for his hike. He had chosen a very safe trail which he had taken several times, and after that, he had showered and gone on a date. Besides those two events, the day passed without further incident, leading Peter to speculate that his mysterious condition could be linked to either his recent date or his hiking adventure. His concern grew over the possibility of enduring this ailment indefinitely unless he identified its cause. Then, an illuminating thought struck him. Recalling a moment during his hike when he veered off the path to snap a photo, Peter remembered tripping and instinctively grabbing a thorny plant to prevent a fall. This brief contact, though momentarily painful, now seemed to him the likely culprit for the bubbles on his fingertips. Eager for answers, he promptly shared this revelation with a healthcare professional. This critical detail proved instrumental for the medical team, significantly narrowing down their diagnostic search and leading them to determine the cause of Peter's condition. The plant, it was discovered, contained toxins harmful to humans, explaining the unusual bubbles. Fortunately, they also confirmed that Peter's condition was not contagious, and a straightforward treatment regimen soon followed. After 2 weeks of discomfort and uncertainty, Peter was able to resume his familiar daily life, albeit with a newfound caution towards unknown flora, ensuring such an ordeal would be avoided in the future.